By the fall of 1941, the German Wehrmacht seemed invincible. Operation Barbarossa had shattered Soviet defenses, capturing 600,000 prisoners and destroying thousands of tanks. In the north, Leningrad was under siege. In the south, German forces had swept through Ukraine and Crimea. At the center, Field Marshal Fyodor von Bock's army group had advanced to Smolensk, just 180 miles from Moscow. Victory seemed inevitable. With Operation Typhoon, Hitler declared the time had come for the last great decisive battle of the war. The stage was set for what the German High Command, OKH, believed would be a swift and crushing victory, cementing their dominance on the Eastern Front. Yet, beneath this ambitious strategy, critical flaws began to emerge. As the panzers raced toward the Soviet capital, they confronted challenges no blitzkrieg had ever endured: vast distances, relentless Soviet resistance, and brutal conditions that ultimately halted them just 15 miles from the city. What caused the seemingly unstoppable German advance to falter so close to victory? And how did this failure become a turning point that reshaped the fate of the Eastern Front? Join us as we unravel the story of Operation Typhoon and explore the critical reasons behind the collapse of Germany's ambitious push to capture Moscow. From the start of Barbarossa, Hitler prioritized destroying Soviet field armies over capturing strategic targets like Moscow. As late as August 1941, his orders emphasized securing the Crimea, Ukraine's resources, and cutting off Soviet access to oil, rather than focusing on Moscow. But by August, German victories to the north and south of the Eastern Front and reports of Soviet weakness convinced Hitler to reconsider. Soviet forces appeared vulnerable near Vyazma and Bryansk, west of Moscow, presenting an opportunity for a decisive encirclement. Persuaded by OKH and his generals, Hitler issued Führer Directive 35 on September 6th, ordering the destruction of Soviet forces near Army Group Center and a subsequent drive on Moscow. To execute Führer Directive 35, Army Group Center and OKH devised Operation Typhoon, a massive offensive stretching across a 150-mile front. It brought together 1.9 million men, 15 panzer divisions, 8 motorized divisions, and 47 infantry divisions, supported by 4,000 heavy artillery pieces, 549 aircraft, and 1,700 tanks. For the first time, the Wehrmacht would have both numerical and qualitative superiority over Soviet forces. The plan aimed to encircle Soviet forces at Vyazma and Bryansk. Hermann Hoth's 3rd Panzer Army would strike from the north and Erich Hopner's 4th Panzer Army from the south to trap defenders at Vyazma, while Heinz Guderian's 2nd Panzer Army would encircle Bryansk. Once those pockets were eliminated, the path to Moscow would be open. The operation began with Guderian's attack on Bryansk on September 30th, followed by the main thrust on October 2nd. But logistics posed a significant challenge. Captured rail lines were underperforming, handling only half to two-thirds of their original capacity, while garrison demands in Poland drained supplies heading to the front. Army Group Center had just 4 railheads to serve 6 armies, limited by poor roads and a chronic lack of motor transport. With 2/3 of its artillery horse-drawn, Germany's Osttheer, its army in the east, faced an immense strain. Only 6,500 of the 13,000 tons of daily supplies required could reach the front, setting the stage for a logistical nightmare. While Germany faced logistical hurdles, the Soviet position was far more dire. The defense of Moscow fell to Lieutenant General Iwan Koniev's Western Front, consisting of 6 rifle armies, a 5-division cavalry group, and 3 reserve rifle divisions. To the south, Lieutenant General Andrei Yeremenko's Bryansk front provided support, while Marshal Semyon Budyonny's reserve front added 6 more armies, 2 of which were already filling gaps. These forces, totaling 95 divisions with 864,000 combat troops, were stretched thin and worn down after months of piecemeal counterattacks ordered by Stalin. Soviet rifle divisions, composed mostly of poorly trained recruits, averaged only 5,000 to 7,000 soldiers, less than half their authorized strength. Heavy artillery, medium tanks, and combat aircraft were in critically short supply, leaving Soviet forces at a severe disadvantage against the well-equipped German army. To make matters worse, Stalin's refusal to trade space for time further restricted his generals, forcing them to defend at all costs as the German advance threatened Moscow. The battle for Moscow began on September 30th, with Guderian's panzers launching a swift assault. Striking northeast toward Oryol and north toward Bryansk, they smashed through 5 divisions, tearing open the southern flank of the Soviet 13th Army. By October 3rd, Guderian's forces had captured Oryol so quickly that they overtook trams still running in the streets, forcing the 13th Army into retreat toward Bryansk. On October 2nd, the main offensive began. The 3rd and 4th Panzer armies targeted Soviet forces near Vyazma. 3rd Panzer Army advanced from Smolensk, breaching the junction between the 19th and 30th Armies and seizing Dnieper River crossings in just 2 days, opening the northern approach to Vyazma. South of Vyazma, Hopner's 4th Panzer Army punched through Soviet lines, shattering Budyonny's 43rd and 33rd Armies. By October 5th, Hopner had widened the breach enough to unleash 57th Panzer Corps deep into Soviet rear positions east of Vyazma. Meanwhile, Army Group Center's infantry divisions pinned 4 Soviet armies, 16th, 20th, 24th, and 50th, preventing them from retreating or aiding their beleaguered comrades at Vyazma and Bryansk. German pressure mounted relentlessly, tightening the noose around the Soviet defenders. As Operation Typhoon began, the Kremlin's focus remained on Ukraine, delaying its response by 3 critical days. Reserves were hastily pulled from the Urals, Central Asia, and the Far East, but these reinforcements faced overwhelming German pressure. To the north, Konev's desperate counteroffensive failed, with heavy Soviet losses. In the center, Budyonny's reserve front crumbled entirely under the 4th Panzer Army's assault, leaving his forces in shambles by October 4th. Stalin, enraged by these failures, dismissed Konev and considered executing him. On October 5th, he appointed General Georgy Zhukov, his most capable commander, to take charge of the faltering defense. By October 7th, the situation had spiraled further. Konev's retreat orders to the 16th, 19th, and 20th Armies were impossible to follow, due to relentless German pressure. Near Vyazma, Budyonny's defenses collapsed under dual armored attacks, allowing German panzers to encircle 400,000 Soviet troops from 5 armies. Over the next 5 days, German forces annihilated 25 rifle divisions and 5 tank brigades in the so-called Kessel or Cauldron battle. In the south, Guderian's advance suffered delays from fuel shortages, but eventually encircled Soviet forces near Bryansk. While the pocket wasn't fully sealed, significant Soviet forces were trapped, though some divisions managed to escape. By mid-October, the Red Army had suffered catastrophic losses: 1 million men, including 673,000 captured, as well as 1,277 tanks, and 4,378 artillery pieces destroyed. The first phase of Typhoon shattered 64 Soviet rifle divisions, 11 tank brigades, and 50 artillery regiments. Confident in their success, German propaganda declared the war as good as won. But the road to Moscow still loomed ahead. Guderian's 24th Panzer Corps paused at Orel for 2 critical days, awaiting fuel resupplies. When the advance toward Tula resumed, fierce resistance by T-34 tanks at the Lysiza River and Mtsensk slowed progress. By October 7th, light snow signaled the onset of the Rasputitsa, the infamous mud season, which immobilized German mechanized forces until winter freezes hardened the roads. Meanwhile, OKH diluted Army Group Center strength by redirecting forces. The 9th Army and 3rd Panzer Army captured Rzhev and Kalinin, while Guderian's 48th Panzer Corps was sent south toward Kursk. These diversions weakened the push on Moscow, just as Zhukov rushed reinforcements into defensive positions west of the capital. At Borodino, Yelnya, and Mozhaysk, Zhukov assembled 18 rifle divisions and 11 tank brigades, 90,000 men, to defend Moscow. Maloyaroslavets fell to the 57th Panzer Corps on October 18th, but Soviet reinforcements from the 33rd Army stalled German exploitation. Further north, fierce battles at Volokholamsk delayed the advance until October 27th, as worsening snow, rain, and mud severely hindered German mobility. Despite progress, the Soviet resistance and deteriorating conditions continued to grind down the German offensive. By October 18th, Hoepner's forces had shattered the Mozhaysk line, capturing Mozhaysk and advancing to within 55 miles of Moscow. The 32nd Rifle Division's determined defense at Borodino delayed the German advance, but could not stop it. This victory echoed Napoleon's triumph at Borodino in 1812, fueling panic among Muscovites. Civilians fled the city, and the government evacuated eastward, though Stalin and the High Command remained. Despite their gains, the Germans faced mounting logistical challenges. Muddy roads and inadequate supply lines left Army Group Center critically short of fuel and ammunition. By October 24th, these issues, combined with worsening weather, forced Box forces to halt, reducing their campaign to a costly war of attrition. In the south, Guderian's advance toward Tula faced similar obstacles. After delays at Mtsensk and weeks of resupply efforts, his 24th Panzer Corps resumed its push on October 22nd. On October 28th, his forces breached Soviet defenses south of Tula, but a desperate stand by local militia, NKVD troops, and anti-aircraft crews, reinforced by the 32nd Tank Brigade and Rifle Divisions, thwarted a direct assault on the city. Deep mud limited German mobility, giving Tula and Moscow a temporary reprieve as the roads awaited the freezing grip of winter. Guderian's renewed assault on Tula faced significant challenges. His 2nd Panzer Army, exposed after bypassing smaller Soviet units, was forced to divert resources to secure its right flank. 53rd Corps was tasked with protecting supply lines, but spoiling attacks by the Soviet 3rd and 50th Armies triggered a 10-day battle, further delaying Guderian's advance until November 18th. These skirmishes drained critical ammunition and fuel stocks, stalling momentum. Meanwhile, Zhukov was rapidly building his defenses. By late October, reinforcements began pouring in: 10 rifle divisions, 19 armored units, and several militia and cavalry formations. November brought an additional 22 rifle divisions, 17 brigades, 14 cavalry divisions, 4 armored units, and 11 ski battalions. By mid-November, Zhukov had amassed 38 infantry divisions, 3 tank divisions, and 14 tank brigades, despite many troops having minimal training. Zhukov deployed these forces strategically along Moscow's western front. 7 armies, including the 50th, were tasked with defending Tula and its approaches. Stalin's insistence on offensive actions led to piecemeal counterattacks that dispersed some reserves, but Zhukov concentrated enough strength to delay Guderian's panzers and hold the line. Ruthlessly focused, Zhukov maintained discipline among his commanders and braced for the decisive struggle to defend the Soviet capital. By mid-November, Hitler faced a critical decision: press on to Moscow or halt and rebuild for winter. Confident in victory, he ordered Army Group Center to resume the offensive on November 15th, predicting, "One final heave, and we shall triumph." The plan called for a double envelopment of Moscow. The 3rd and 4th Panzer armies, with 18 divisions, would attack from the north, while Guderian's 2nd Panzer Army, with 9 divisions, would capture Tula and advance from the south. To fix Soviet forces in place, Field Marshal von Kluge's 4th Army, with 14 infantry divisions, would launch pinning attacks along the Nara River. Despite its bold intent, the offensive faced major challenges. Bach now commanded only 38 divisions, half the force from the campaign's outset. 3rd Panzer Army had depleted its reserves at Kalinin, and counterattacks forced the 2nd and 9th Armies to secure Bach's exposed flanks. Logistics also remained dire. Supply shortages plagued Army Group Center, with rail networks struggling to deliver even a reduced quota of supplies. Bach's men entered this final push with minimal resources, knowing the outcome would hinge on a razor's edge for both sides. The final battle for Moscow began with a German attack on November 18th, led by 9th Army's 27th Corps and supported by the 1st Panzer Division. They forced Major General Dmitry Lelyashenko's 30th Army to retreat toward Klin, 52 miles from Moscow, allowing 3rd Panzer Army to cross the Lama River, 60 miles from the city. On November 18th, the main German thrust began, as 4th Panzer Army's 5th Corps and 46th Panzer Corps breached the gap between the 30th and 16th Armies. Rokossovsky's 16th Army was forced to fall back to Istra, leaving a vulnerable gap for the Germans to exploit. By November 23rd, Klin had fallen, but Bach was forced to shift focus to defend his left flank from Koniev's counterattacks near Kalinin. Meanwhile, fierce fighting continued at Istra, where Rokossovsky's 78th Rifle Division mounted a valiant defense against the SS Das Reich Division. Though the town fell on November 27th, the battle inflicted heavy casualties on Das Reich and bought General Zhukov critical time to reinforce Moscow's defenses. The weather and supply shortages hampered German progress, but Bach pressed on. On November 27th, 56th Panzer Corps reached the Moskva-Volga Canal, but was repelled by Soviet forces. Further northwest, the 2nd Panzer Division captured Krasnaya Polyana on November 30th, but Rokossovsky's resistance, worsening weather, and fuel shortages halted the German advance, leaving the fate of Moscow still uncertain. In late November, Guderian focused on fending off counterattacks around Tula, while gathering fuel for one final assault. At the same time, Soviet reinforcements arrived, and Lieutenant General Iwan Boldin's 50th Army launched spoiling attacks that severely damaged Guderian's right flank, forcing him to divert divisions for protection. This delayed his encirclement of Tula. By November 24th, Guderian's 24th Panzer Corps advanced northeast of Tula, but encountered unexpectedly strong Soviet defenses. He received little support from Field Marshal von Kluge's Fourth Army, which was sluggish in providing help. Despite briefly cutting the Tula-Moscow highway on December 3rd, Guderian was forced to withdraw the next day when Soviet armor under Zhukov counterattacked. Meanwhile, von Kluge's Fourth Army had remained inactive through late November, allowing Zhukov to shift units to reinforce the hard-pressed Rokossovsky. Only on December 1st did von Kluge launch a four-division attack, but by then Hoepner's Panzer Army had stalled, and von Kluge's efforts were too little, too late. After Zhukov moved his reserves back to the center, von Kluge retreated across the Nara River, effectively conceding defeat. As Zhukov later noted, the lack of central attacks allowed him to shift reserves to counter the German flanks. By early December, the German advance had reached its peak. From Khimki, less than 12 miles from Moscow, German troops were running low on fuel and ammunition, having suffered 155,000 casualties and lost over 700 tanks. Unbeknownst to the Germans, the Red Army now held a numerical advantage, and fresh Soviet reinforcements had arrived. On December 8th, Hitler ordered a halt to the offensive, instructing Bach to hold all captured territory. On December 5th, Soviet counterattacks began at the north end of the front, east of Klin. The 3rd Panzer Army, weakened by previous battles, was vulnerable. Colonel General Hans Reinhardt kept his operational tanks close to the front, leaving them exposed to rapid Soviet thrusts. Soviet forces, including the 1st Shock, 10th and 20th Armies, launched coordinated attacks, forcing 3rd Panzer to retreat to Klin and 4th Panzer to Istra. By December 11th, Rokossovsky's forces had pushed the Germans out of Istra, and Bach's left wing was on the verge of collapse. On December 12th, Rokossovsky cut off 3rd Panzer's retreat by capturing key roads, isolating 4 Panzer divisions. The trapped Germans managed to escape, but suffered heavy losses. To the south, Guderian faced mounting pressure from Soviet forces around Tula. Boldon's 50th Army, with reinforcements, battered his front and flanks, forcing Guderian to withdraw toward Orel by December 12th. The German retreat marked the failure of Operation Typhoon and the salvation of Moscow. Operation Typhoon nearly ended in disaster for the Soviet Union. From September 30th to December 15th, the Red Army suffered approximately 1.5 million casualties, including 350,000 in December alone, and was forced to evacuate Moscow. In contrast, Army Group Center lost over 150,000 men and devastating amounts of heavy equipment: 800 tanks, 983 artillery pieces, 473 heavy mortars, and 800 anti-tank guns were destroyed or abandoned during December. However, the most severe blow to the German war machine was psychological. The Wehrmacht's myth of invincibility was shattered, particularly as the subhuman Slavic forces resisted. Hitler's confidence in his generals eroded, leading him to relieve the head of OKH and take personal command. He dismissed several key commanders, including Bach, Guderian, Hoepner, Strauss, and 4 corps commanders. The first phase of Typhoon, which culminated in the Vyazma and Bryansk pocket liquidations, was tactically successful, but logistics and Guderian's failure to decisively close the Bryansk pocket allowed Soviet troops to escape to Tula. The November operational pause, when the Red Army was reeling, was caused by logistical failures that prevented vital supplies from reaching the front. By the time Bach resumed the attack, Soviet reinforcements and harsh weather conditions began to shift the balance in favor of Zhukov. The second phase of Typhoon, the final push on Moscow, was the most flawed. OKH and Bach having underestimated Soviet reserves, committed every remaining soldier, assuming the Red Army had no further strength to resist. Hitler's overconfidence, fueled by overly optimistic reports, led him to believe a final assault would topple the Soviet Union. But with the arrival of reinforcements from Siberia and the formation of fresh Soviet armies, this assumption crumbled. Unlike Poland, France, and the Low Countries, the Soviet Union would not collapse under the weight of German aggression. Instead, from the gates of Moscow, the Red Army launched a westward offensive, a relentless push that, over the course of 3.5 years, would culminate in the fall of Berlin.